What's up, scholars? Welcome back. And so in this video, it's going to be a two-part video. This video specifically, we're going to look at government and what exactly that means. In the next video, we're going to be looking at citizenship and the core values that American citizens hold dear. So yet again, before we start, we're going to start off with a joke. Have you read about the book about anti-gravity? It was hard to put down. So what exactly is government? Well, our textbook definition states that it's a formal institution which a territory and its people are ruled. Well, with that definition, our notion of government is very broad. So we're going to narrow down and focus on three different forms of government that are really characterized by the amount of power and freedom that the government allows. So we're going to look at authoritarian governments, totalitarian governments, and lastly, democratic governments. So to start off with authoritarian governments, let's turn to our resident experts on all things authoritarian, Mrs. Purdue.
So let's talk about authoritarian states. In 1964, there's a political scientist, Juan Lentz of Yale, who comes up with 4 criteria for what makes an authoritarian state. So based on his definition, there has to be constraints on political institutions and groups, constraints on political mobilization by the mass public. The legitimacy of the state has to be based on the idea of that it's combating some type of evil, be it within the state or internationally. And lastly, there's a very ill-defined definition of executive power. So if we're looking at all of these ideas, basically what authoritarian states are and authoritarianism is submission to an authority or political power with any type of with no restraints on it.
I honestly don't know anyone that finds authoritarian leaders as interesting as Mrs. Purdue, so she was a good choice to actually tell you guys a lot about it. So back on track. So with that, right, let's further simplify our definition of authoritarian governments. We're going to say authoritarian governments recognizes no formal limits on their power. They can do whatever they want to. However, their power may be restrained by other social institutions. Totalitarian governments are a lot like authoritarian governments in the sense that both totalitarian and authoritarian governments recognizes no formal limits on power. Where the difference is, though, is that totalitarian governments seeks to absorb or eliminate other social institutions that may challenge it. So in other words, authoritarian rulers or governments work within the system. Totalitarian governments absorb the system and become the system itself. The last type is a democratic government, a democratic system of governance. So you should all know what a democratic government entails. You live in a country that practices democracy and its people have claimed forever that it's the best nation in the world, right? USA, USA. That was awkward, I'm sorry. So just in case you don't know how to define a democratic system, let's define it. A democratic form of government is a political system that allows its citizens to play a significant part in the governmental process. But for us, we're going to take a look at 2 subsets of democracy. First, we're going to look at direct democracy. So a direct democracy is where a citizen or citizens create and vote on laws. So think of like ancient Greece, think of the New England colonies during the 13 colonies era. Basically, every single person has a voice and every single person is actively involved in the lawmaking process. And so in theory, this sounds really nice, right? Everyone is involved, everyone has a voice, but there are some major problems that come with giving everyone a voice and allowing everyone to participate in the lawmaking process. The biggest problem, first and foremost, is the issue of time, right? If everyone is going to be involved, that takes a tremendous amount of time. The second problem is closely tied with the first one, is this issue of knowledge, right? Not every single person is knowledgeable about every single little thing you need to know to create good laws. And so in general, right, we're going to say in general, masses of people make unwise unwise decisions. For example, take teenage boys, right? As a former teenage boy myself, I can say with certainty that individually, teenage boys can be smart. Some teenage boys may verge on being extremely intelligent. However, within groups, when teenage boys get together, they oftentimes make the worst possible decisions ever known to mankind, right? Mainly because they're teenage boys. And so Alexander Hamilton wrote and stated that the masses are turbulent and changing and seldom judge or determine right. Basically, he's saying that the masses, the common everyday people as a group, should not be trusted to make laws for the country. Right? Because what they end up doing, if they had that power, if they had that voice, isn't really going to be the right decision. And a lot of our founding fathers shared a similar viewpoint. And so that's why today we don't have a direct democracy, we have an indirect democracy. An indirect democracy is also known as a republic. And in indirect democracy, the citizens elect representatives to make laws and rules for them. Of course, this system isn't perfect and has its flaws, right? Like sometimes the representatives don't accurately listen to their constituents, or the wants and needs of the constituents of the citizens may be so wide and varied that the representative may not be able to satisfy everyone's wants or needs. But even with all of its warts and flaws, it's still the system of, or still like the subset of democracy that we practice today in the United States. And lastly, right, let's switch gears and let's talk about one of the most incorrectly used set of terms in political science, the difference between a nation and a state. And we could throw in country, but we're not going to. So a state is an independent sovereign government that controls a certain defined space and is recognized by other states. So with this definition, right, there are three major characteristics which you guys see on the screen and on the Google slide. Right? One, when states are tied to territory. This means that states have clear and defined borders that are recognized, right, by other states. Two, the states have to be staffed by governmental personnel. Right? So there's people working for the government. And three, states are sovereign. And that can mean a lot of different things. But the definition that we're going to use for sovereign is that the state has legitimate use of force within its territory. Right? Other definitions can include like the state can make rules within its territory, they can control information within its territory. But for us, we're going to say you are sovereign if you have the legitimate use of force within your territory. A nation, on the other hand, is a group of people who see themselves as a group based on history or a shared set of beliefs. So a nation's existence, definition, and members can change drastically and dramatically based on circumstances. Some political scientists argue that nations are imagined communities that are bound together by notions of unity that can pivot around things like religion, ethnicity, identity, language, or even cultural practice. So with this, right, not every single nation is a state, right? So think of the Kurds. Some states, right, may contain parts or all of a nation, right? So think of any sort of like Korea, right? Korea is a state. Also, right, because Koreans share a shared sense of identity, cultural, language, and whatever, right, they're also a nation. And so now that you know the difference between a state and a nation, let's take a look at an example, right? So let's take a look at our glorious leaders, Mr. Gabriel's Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok handle, IndyNationLCPS. Right? Actually, how good is he on TikTok, right? I'm actually a little jealous about how good he is on social media. So back on track, right? Is his social media handle, or is IndyNationLCPS aptly named? Is Independence High School truly a nation? Well, based on our definition, right, are we a group who sees ourselves as a cohesive unit bound together by a shared culture and or history? Well, yes. And because of that, right, we are a nation, right? Even though our history may not be long, it's only been a year since the school has opened, right? all of us bought into the culture of and helped create the culture of Independence High School. And so because of that, we can say, right, that Mr. Gabriel really chose his name correctly. Independence High School is truly a nation. We're bound together through history and a shared sense of culture. So great job, Mr. Gabriel. Another example, right? Let's look at the United States. Well, we can argue the United States is a state. Actually, that's not an argument, that's truth. We are a state because we're called the United States, right? We have a clearly defined set of borders within the United States. The government has legitimate use of force within the territory. And also we're staffed by governmental personnel, right? So the United States is indeed a state. Is the United States a nation? Well, the answer is yes, right? We have a common shared history together, right? You guys learned it last year in United States history. We also share a sense of identity, right? Although we may be fragmented in the sense that we're like African Americans, Asian Americans, right? Latino Americans, right? Latino Americans, right? We all share the identity of an American. So the United States, we're going to say, is a nation state. We are both a nation and also a state here. All right. And so that's all I have for you guys today. I'll see you guys in the next video when we talk about citizens. Peace.
So what is a great example of living in an authoritarian state?